All my life, I yearned to read my husband's final letter, but when I finally learned how, I wished only that I had remained blind. Being illiterate, my life has always felt as if a part of it was missing. People communicated with one another through pieces of paper, through notebooks. They read, they wrote, they understood, and I could not. When they spoke, I just nodded. When they handed me a paper, I just left a thumbprint. For 80 years, that is how I lived. Because when you cannot read, you can only listen, and you are forced to believe that what they say is the truth written on the page. My tragedy began with that very obligatory trust. Antonio, my husband, has been gone for several years now. Ever since he passed, this house has not just been empty, it has become frighteningly silent. The only remaining sounds are the wind weaving through the eaves and the sound of my own sighs. So, every morning, I go out to the garden. I do not do much, just pluck a few withered leaves and gently loosen the soil around the base of the thorny rosebush he planted with his own hands. I would touch each rough thorn, each tender green leaf, as if by doing so I could feel the warmth of his hands, still lingering somewhere. I remember his words, "This plant is thorny but resilient." It reminds me of us. My story begins on a morning just like that. As I was searching for a little warmth in my memories, I had no idea that my last moments of peace were about to be stolen from me. Suddenly, the roar of a car engine erupted from the road, a harsh, unfamiliar sound, before stopping right in front of my gate. It was not the neighbour's rickety motorcycle, nor was it the vegetable truck. This sound was elegant and foreign. My heart tightened. The old iron gate let out a mournful creak. It was Marco, my son, but he was not smiling like he usually did. He just nodded and urged me inside. With him were Sophia, his wife, and a strange man. The man wore an expensive suit, his hair slicked back, and he carried a black leather briefcase. He did not look at me. His eyes scanned the yard and the house with a cold gaze, as if he were measuring everything. Sophia took my arm and led me into the living room, telling me to sit in Antonio's old armchair. The man placed the briefcase on the table, and the click of the latch sounded sharp and clear. He spread several white papers on the table, covered in tiny, dark letters, looking like a swarm of crawling ants. They stared at me, and I felt as if they were mocking me. The familiar feeling of shame rose, burning in my chest. The man, Bellini, pushed the papers and a pen toward me. It was a silver fountain pen, gleaming and heavy, unlike anything I had ever held. It was cold to the touch. I looked at Marco, my eyes pleading, waiting for him to tell me what to do. He nodded, his voice firm. "It is just the land tax papers, Mom. Sign it so we can get this over with." I was still hesitant, my hand trembling. I did not want to have to leave my thumbprint in front of a stranger. Seeing this, Marco came forward. He did not take my hand gently. He gripped it tightly, his fingers pressing down hard. How could the hand of the child I had raised feel so cold and strange? He pressed my hand down, guiding my fingers to draw a messy scrawl. I could clearly hear the nib of the pen scratching across the paper, a dry, sharp sound. When it was done, he released my hand immediately. A few days later, when I had nearly forgotten about the incident, Bellini returned. He did not say a word, just coldly posted a paper on the door. The white paper with its dark black letters stood out against my old, worn wooden door. I watched from a distance, an inexplicable feeling of unease rising within me. That afternoon, Marco and Sophia arrived. As soon as she stepped into the yard, Sophia froze, her eyes wide as she stared at the paper on the door. Then she let out a piercing scream, a sound that tore through the afternoon quiet. She ran to me and threw her arms around me, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Mom, what did you sign?" "We have lost the house, Mom." Marco roared and lunged forward, punching the walls so hard the entire partition shook. A chunk of plaster crumbled to the floor. "Damn it! Those crooks! Do not worry, Mom. I will find a way." My ears were ringing. Everything around me seemed to spin. Lost the house. Those two words repeated over and over in my mind, crushing every other thought. I could not stand steady and had to lean on Sophia's shoulder. I looked at my daughter-in-law's tear-streaked face, at my son's fist clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. How could it not be real? At that moment, I believed them. I believed this catastrophe had befallen our entire family, and that the greatest fault was my own ignorance. The pain of losing my only home mingled with an overwhelming sense of shame. In that chaotic moment, all I could do was cling to my children, believing they were my only support. They took me to their house, a large, luxurious home. But I did not belong there. I was given a small room at the end of the hall, and I stayed cooped up inside it. The shock of losing my home did not make me cry. It left me numb. Only a single thought repeated in my head. It is all my fault. It is because I cannot read. The shame gnawed at me. The price to pay was far too high. One evening at dinner, I put down my chopsticks and said, "I want to learn how to read." Marco and Sophia burst out laughing. "Mom," Marco said, "you are 80 years old. Your mind is not sharp enough for studying anymore. Just stay home and rest. Do not become a laughingstock for the whole world to see." Their mockery did not discourage me. On the contrary, it lit a fire within me. I had made my decision. I would not let them know. I secretly saved a few spare coins, and one morning, I lied and said I was going for a walk to clear my head. Instead, I found my way to the literacy class at the community centre. At that moment, I had only one thought. I have to learn. I have to know how to read so that no one can ever deceive me, so that I will never again suffer the humiliation of losing my home like this. I thought about the neighbours' whispers over the years, and I promised myself I would prove them all wrong. But my first day of school was torture. The room was full of children the age of my grandchildren. They stared at me, an old woman with a stooped back and snow-white hair, huddled in a corner, then they whispered and giggled. One of them was bold enough to call out, "Flying Grandma!" Those words felt like a slap in the face. Humiliation burned my cheeks. All the determination born from my anger seemed to shatter. I wanted to stand up and leave immediately. Perhaps Marco was right. I was just making a fool of myself. On instinct, I touched the pocket where I kept Antonio's letter. And then, just as I was about to give up, another memory flooded back, one even more painful than this ridicule. It was the day Antonio died. I was in the garden when I heard a loud thud from inside the house. I ran in to find him sprawled on the floor, clutching his chest. A heart attack. He was dying. I knelt beside him, frantic. He was not looking at me. His eyes were fixed on a small, crumpled piece of paper on the floor next to a pencil. With the last of his strength, he pushed the paper toward me. On it were scrawled, trembling lines that formed no discernible shape. He tried to speak, his breath broken and ragged. Don't let anyone see." And then his hand went limp. He was gone. Back then, all I could do was cry. I put that piece of paper away, thinking it was just the meaningless scribbles of a dying man. But now, sitting here, being ridiculed for not knowing my A's from my B's, I finally understood. Losing my home was a pain. Being mocked was a humiliation. But those were not the deepest reasons. The letter he had prepared and the note he wrote in his final moments, those were the greatest regrets of my life. They were my husband's desperate cries for help, written in a language I could not understand. The children's laughter behind me suddenly seemed distant, unimportant. The shame of being ridiculed was nothing compared to the regret of being unable to understand my husband's final words. My trembling hand clenched into a fist, and I placed it on the small school desk. I would stay. I began this journey because of my wounded pride, but I would see it through to the end for the love and the gnawing regret I felt for Antonio. And so, the real battle began. It was not just about learning. It was a struggle against my own body. My hands were calloused from 80 years of labor, my knuckles swollen and stiff. Holding a slender pencil was like trying to thread a needle in the dark. I tried to write the letter A, but my trembling hand would not obey, managing only a crooked, wobbly line. The children burst out, laughing again. Even more painfully, my eyesight had grown dim. The letters the teacher wrote on the board seemed to dance and blur before my eyes. I had to squint and lean forward, struggling to make out their shapes in my mind. At night, when Marco and Sophia were fast asleep, my little room transformed into a secret classroom. I would pull the blanket over my head and turn on a tiny flashlight I had found. In its faint light, I would practice writing with a trembling hand in an old notebook. Some nights, my hand would cramp up so painfully that I had to put the pen down and rub it for a long time. There were moments I grew so discouraged I wanted to throw it all away, able to do nothing but bury my face in my pillow, frustrated but not daring to cry out loud. But every time, the image of Marco forcing my hand to sign that paper would flash in my mind, and the anger would give me new strength. I did not miss a single class. I studied like a drowning person gasping for air. Gradually, a small miracle happened. My hand began to grow familiar with the pen. I started to recognize the letters. The letter A, the letter N. Then one day, after countless failures, I was able to write my name, A, N, N, A. I looked at those 4 simple letters, the first accomplishment of my life created by my own hands, and tears streamed down my face. A small turning point came. I had caught a cold, and Marco gave me a blister pack of pills, saying casually, "Mom, take 1 pill before you eat." That night I felt unwell. I picked up the pill packet, and under the dim light of the night lamp, I squinted, trying with all my might. I spelled out each word, one by one, as laboriously as if I were climbing a steep slope. TAKAFTERMEALS. Take after meals. He had told me wrong. It was a small detail, but it was the first time that knowledge had saved me from harm. For the first time, I was no longer dependent on his words. From then on, I studied even more enthusiastically. I spelled out everything I saw, the words on the milk carton, the words on the old newspaper Sophia used to wrap the trash. And then, one day, the miracle happened. While reading a small news clipping, I was suddenly able to read a complete sentence fluently. Word by word, the meaning appeared clearly in my mind. They were no longer meaningless symbols. They had meaning. I had done it. It turned out that learning to read was not impossible. The hard part was not the learning. The hard part was the fear and shame that had imprisoned me for 80 years. And now I had finally broken out of that cage. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the steady tick-tock of the old clock, waiting. I waited until the entire house was submerged in silence, until the rhythmic snores of Marco and Sophia echoed from their bedroom. I sat up quietly, my bare feet making no sound on the cold floor. I went to the door and carefully turned the lock. Only then, in the privacy and safety of my own space, did I dare to face the truth. My hand trembled as I took Antonio's note out of my pocket. It was much more crumpled after all the days I had carried it with me like a protective talisman. Now, it felt more like a sentence. I sat under the dim night lamp, carefully unfolding the paper as if it might turn to dust. The paper inside was old. I took a deep breath, and then I looked at the words. The message was not long. Just a few words, scribbled in what was a shadow of Antonio's familiar, strong handwriting. My eyes were dim, and I had to bring the paper close, squinting, spelling out each word slowly, as if each one were a step leading down into a dark abyss. Anna, do not trust Marco. That was all. 4 scribbled words. But they carried more weight than 1,000 words. They were like a hammer blow to my head. This was not Antonio's handwriting, but it was his final scream. I read it again and again, hoping I had been mistaken. But I had not. It was not a loving farewell. It was not a reminder to take care of myself. It was a warning, written with the last moments of his life. Why? Why would Antonio write something like that about his own son? Why did he have to use his last breath, in his final agony, to write a warning about the very child he raised? Suspicion, a feeling I had never once had for my son, began to creep into my mind. I tried to remember that day, every single detail. Marco said he had found his father that way, that he had tried to call for an ambulance. But I suddenly realized these words were not written calmly as a piece of advice. This was the handwriting of a man in sheer panic, in excruciating pain. This was the scream of a dying man. What had happened in this house before I ran in? An argument? Had some truth been exposed? A truth so terrible that his heart could not bear it. And why, in the final moments of his life, when physical pain was tearing him apart, was the only thing on his mind not to tell me he loved me, but to warn me about our own son? There must have been a direct threat, an imminent danger that he could see. Unless Marco himself was the cause of that pain. The thought flashed through my mind, cold and terrifying. It was too horrific to believe, yet it explained everything. It explained the panic in Antonio's eyes. It explained this desperate warning. And then, everything started to make sense. The house, the perfect performance by Marco and Sophia, my daughter-in-law's tears, my son's fist punching the wall. Were they really deceived too? Or were they just brilliant actors? The next morning, after they left for work, I searched Marco's study. My heart was pounding, my limbs trembling. What was I doing? I was rummaging through my own son's room like a thief, but I could not stop. I found a file folder. I pulled out a document that looked identical to the one I had signed. This time, I was no longer an illiterate old woman. I squinted, tracing each letter. And then I saw it, printed clearly on the first line, Atto di vendita, deed of sale. It was written there, as clear as day. There was no mistaking it. Their claim that they did not know it was a contract to sell the house was a blatant lie. The truth hit me like a bucket of cold water. But I did not stop there. I had to know whose name was on the deed to my house now. I went to the city's land registry office, lying that I needed to check the paperwork for my senior citizen's pension. The clerk typed on the computer, then printed out a sheet of paper for me. The new owner was not the swindler. It was my son. The paper fell from my hand, fluttering down to the cold floor. I stood there, numb. Everything shattered. It was not a crack. It was a complete disintegration into ash. Antonio had known. He had known his son's true face all along. That man, Bellini, was just an actor Marco had hired to deceive his own mother. From that moment on, a terrifying coldness enveloped me. The hot grief was gone, replaced by a block of ice forming in my chest. The weak, trusting old Anna died right there in the hallway of the land registry office. A different Anna picked up the paper, folded it carefully, and walked away. There was no more sorrow, no more anger. There was only a single purpose, as clear and sharp as a shard of broken glass. I had to expose him. I returned home and my performance began. I continued to pretend to be the confused, illiterate old woman. I made my posture more stooped, and at times I would deliberately drop and break a cup. When they talked, I just sat there, my eyes staring blankly at a random point on the wall. I became a piece of the furniture, invisible and harmless. That very invisibility was my weapon. I used the last of the meager savings Antonio had hidden in an old box to buy a tiny recording device. I waited until they were out, my heart pounding, and I knelt under the coffee table in the living room. My old knees ached, but I did not care. I stuck the tiny device to the underside of the table where they often sat and talked after dinner, then disguised it with a layer of dust. My initial goal was simply to record evidence of them admitting they had tricked me into signing the house away. But what I heard was 10,000 times more horrifying. That night, after making sure they were sound asleep, I crept out to the living room and retrieved the recorder. I pulled the blanket over my head in my room, switched on the small flashlight, and put in the earphones. The sound was terrifyingly clear and close, as if they were whispering right in my ear. At first, it was Sophia's nagging about money. Then Marco's voice came through, full of irritation. "Shut up! It's already done. That house is ours now. The old man is dead. What can anyone do about it?" Sophia's voice was a mumble. But I'm still scared. What if someone finds out about your father?" My heart stopped. I held my breath until my chest ached. Marco's voice was laced with cruelty. Find out what? He died of a heart attack. It serves him right for daring to interfere in my business. He said he was going to call the police, so we had a huge fight. He clutched his chest and fell. I would have given him his medicine, but then I reconsidered. I took his pills away. If he just died slowly like that, who would suspect a thing? The recorder fell from my hand. I felt nothing anymore. No trembling, no fear, just a cold, gaping void. The room suddenly felt as cold as a tomb. It was not an illness. It was not an accident. It was my son. He had killed his father. He had stood by and watched his own father die a slow death in order to steal the house from his own mother. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The submissive old Anna had died last night. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was someone else. I no longer stooped. I stood up straight. I changed into my cleanest set of clothes, the outfit I saved for formal occasions. I walked calmly to the police station. I did not cry, nor did I panic. I placed the small recording device on the desk in front of the police officer, and I told them everything. The end came quickly. The recording was undeniable proof. Marco and Sophia were arrested at their home. The charge of fraud and theft. The charge of manslaughter. I got back everything that was mine. The house, the garden, and my dignity. But this victory did not taste sweet. It tasted only of the bitterness of the truth and the salt of the final tears I shed for the son who had long since died in my heart. News of Marco and Sophia's arrest spread through the town faster than wildfire. The incredible story of an 80-year-old, illiterate woman who single-handedly exposed a monstrous scheme became the talk of every market corner and cafe. The first day I returned home, I saw my neighbours, the ones who used to give me only a polite nod, now peeking from their doorways, watching me with a mixture of curiosity and awe. There were no more whispers behind my back, only silence. But the real satisfaction came a few days later, when I decided to go to the market. As I stepped into the familiar, bustling square, an unusual quiet fell over the space. The gossiping women, the ones who used to look at me with pity, now pretended to turn away, busying themselves with their vegetables. They did not dare to look me in the eye. I walked to the fish stall of Signora Rina, a woman with the sharpest tongue in the region. In the past, she was the one who had once declared loudly for all to hear, "How can someone who's gone her whole life without reading a single word expect to keep a house?" Today, she kept her head down, her hands fumbling awkwardly as she cleaned a fish. "I'll take my usual, please," I said, my voice calm. She hastily selected the freshest fish, wrapped it carefully, and held it out to me with both hands. "Here you are, Signora Anna." It was the first time in my life I had ever heard respect in her voice. But the pinnacle of the story came as I was passing the general store. A young woman was arguing with the shopkeeper. She was in tears, saying she had been overcharged for her gas bill. But the paper, covered in tiny letters and numbers, left her unable to argue her case. A crowd gathered, but no one helped. They just watched. I stepped forward. The crowd automatically parted to let me through. Without a word, I took the bill from the young woman's hand. I looked at the numbers, at the lines of text that were once a maze to me, and now they appeared clear and coherent. I looked up, staring directly into the eyes of the pale-faced shopkeeper, and pointed to a line item. "Here," I said, my voice loud and clear, "you have charged for delivery twice. Give her the money back." The shopkeeper did not dare to argue. He mumbled an apology and quickly pulled money from his wallet to repay her. The entire market was dead silent. Then came a single clap, then another, and then the whole market erupted in applause. They were not just clapping for a corrected bill. They were applauding an undeniable truth. Knowledge is power, and the once illiterate old Anna had now become a protector for the powerless, just as she had once been. I did not go home alone. A group of the village elders, people I knew were also unable to read, followed me. They said nothing, but their eyes said it all. The next day, I no longer went to the garden to search for memories. I dragged the old table out into the yard and set up a small blackboard Antonio had once used for his farm records. That is how my first class began, right under the thorny rosebush, which was now covered in new buds. My students were Giovanni, Signora Maria, and even the mother of the little boy who had once called me Flying Grandma. Sometimes I still think of Marco, but not with hatred, only with pity. He tried to steal my house, but he could never understand that what I had found was so much greater than a house. I had found my voice, and now I would teach others how to never be silent again.